Hello and welcome to Think Outside the Board. This is the Kickstarter Weekly, and this week's episode is going to cover the games that will complete their funding from November 29th through December 5th. Now, I'm changing up how I'm doing these videos a little bit, which means that I'm going to be talking to you first about the games that I played this period. And because it was a holiday season, I actually have a pretty eclectic group of games to talk to you about. So we'll start with that. I'll talk to you about the 6 different games that I played, and then after that, I will cover 8 different Kickstarters that are currently running. Now, if you don't care what I have to say about the games that I played, and you just want to hear about the Kickstarters, you can use the tabs, the bookmarks, in the video and just click on wherever you want to go. Also, when we do get to that section and I'm talking about Kickstarters, if there's anything that is of particular interest to you, you can go down into the description section. Everything is listed down there, and all of the Kickstarter campaigns have links. So you can just click on the link and it'll take you over to the campaign that's currently running. You can take a closer look at it, see if you like it, and maybe decide to back it. Without any further ado, though, let's get to the 6 games that I played this period. So the first game on this list is Dune Imperium, and this is a game that I have played before and talked about before. I even did a first impressions video, which I'll link down below in the description. So if you want to see more about the game or more about my thoughts on the game, you can go check out that video as well. But I continue to really like Dune Imperium. I think I've had maybe about a half a dozen plays so far. It is a really good combination of deck building and worker placement. There's also a combat event that happens every round, and there'll be rewards for that. And then as players are building their deck, there are also certain cards that they can purchase which will give them victory points. And the game essentially is a victory point race. As soon as someone hits 10 victory points, they will trigger the end of the game. Players will complete the round, and then whoever has the most victory points wins. There are also factions, just like in the real world of Dune. There are kind of different groups of people. They're represented in this game by 4 different factions. As you go up on those tracks, you will also get victory points. In fact, some of the time you will get a token if you get really high on the track, which symbolizes your alliance with that faction. But if some other player comes along and passes you on that track, you will then lose that token and they will gain it, and you will lose a victory point and they will gain one. So there's some room in the game for some kind of back and forth. There's heavy player interaction, whether that's where you decide to go in terms of worker placement spaces, which will block those spaces for other players, or in the very direct confrontation combat event that happens every round. Now, I do have the miniatures pre-ordered. Those are coming now. I was a little disappointed that I didn't get to play with them on the most recent play. I was showing it to some friends, I think one who had played it before, and the other player, it was a new game for them. And I knew that the miniatures were kind of on their way, but they just hadn't arrived yet. And I do like the game. It's great. I've been playing it obviously quite a bit now, and there are kind of little cubes in the game which are going to be replaced by little soldier miniatures, as well as some other stuff. And I know that the whole new expansion also contains a larger box, so you'll be able to fit everything into one box. And then on top of that, there is a new expansion which just went on pre-order called The Rise of Ix, and that's something that I'm looking at acquiring as well. But for my money, 2 of the best kind of medium weight games that came out this year are Dune Imperium and Lost Ruins of Arnak, and they both happen to be these combination deck builder and worker placement games. And they don't feel similar to me at all. The games play very differently, but they both do combine those mechanics. And I think, if you're looking for really good, solid, kind of medium weight games that heavier gamers may be interested in playing, but lighter gamers should be able to pick it up, these are both great games, I think, that will appeal to a very wide audience. I also played Grand Austria Hotel, and I have now played that game a few times. I do not have a first impressions video out for that game, and the reason is that I pledged the latest Kickstarter for it, which was really an expansion Kickstarter. So the level that I pledged at, I got the base game kind of deluxeified with this combination of expansions called Let's Waltz. And I have not even touched the expansions yet. I know that one of them puts a ballroom element into the game, and that just kind of opens up a whole new set of mechanics. There is a second expansion in there that has to do with celebrities, and those are cards that are going to be out during the game that players will be able to trigger to use their abilities if they meet those cards' requirements. And I have heard that if you put both of those expansions in the game together, it makes it into a much more crunchy experience and a longer game. There are 3 additional expansions, but they're all smaller, kind of little modules, so I don't think that they really heavily affect the complexity or the length of the game, but they're nice to have just to vary it up. So because I pledged that as a Kickstarter, and it was really more about the expansions, and the base game here was being reprinted, I tend to not do first impressions videos on reprintings, on additional versions of a game that's already existed. The purpose of my first impressions videos is just to get something out quickly when a game is brand new. It's not even a full teach and review, it just shows you some of the mechanics, hopefully enough for you to decide whether or not it's a game for you, and then I talk about my initial impressions of the game, usually after a couple of plays. I do really love Grand Austria Hotel, so I think it is ripe for a full teach and review at some point, probably next year, and I think it would probably make sense when I do that to have played all of the expansion content and be able to talk about all of the different expansion modules. But in essence, Grand Austria Hotel is a dice drafting game, and players select cards. They can have up to 3 sort of guest cards in their cafe. They will need to take actions to give those guests the various food and drink items that they're wanting. And then once they do that, they can move those guests into hotel rooms. There are blocks of hotel rooms divided by 3 colors, red, blue, and yellow. Players need to have those rooms prepared before they send their guests into the rooms. And there's interesting gameplay going on in the hotel in terms of when you fill a block of rooms, depending on the color, that may get you bonus points, extra money, or spaces on the Emperor track, which is something that triggers 3 times in the game, will potentially get you some points as well as a reward if you're high enough on the track. If you're kind of in a middle area, you just won't get anything, and if you're very low on the track, you will have to pay a penalty. And as the game goes on, those penalties get steeper and steeper. But it's just a really good game that has hand management to it. You're going to have those guests that you're trying to get into your cafe. You're dealing with this dice drafting and kind of resources. You also have a second set of cards that you start the game with. There are 6 of them, and those are sort of player powers. So as players take certain actions to get those cards out into the game, they may give them one-time abilities, ongoing abilities, once-around abilities, or endgame scoring. So as players kind of play, they're going to be building up essentially an engine, and each player will be playing a little bit differently depending on, everything that they've done previously and the cards that they have out that are buffing their actions. And for me, this is another one of those games, kind of like Lost Ruins or Dune Imperium, that is just in a really, really good kind of medium area of complexity where I think there are solid enough choices for heavier gamers, but the game is simple enough that it can be fairly easily taught and picked up even by newer gamers. So it's just a really, really solid game all around. There is some luck element in terms of how the dice kind of come out every round and what actions you can take depending on how those dice are rolled, but that will affect all players equally, so it feels fair and balanced to me. Anyway, I really, really like Grand Austria Hotel. Both Dune and Grand Austria Hotel are probably sitting in the 8 to 9 range on a scale of 10 for me. So really good games that I would highly recommend to anyone who likes that genre of game, and maybe even people who are looking to try something new. I also played Horrified because I had one of the game days over the holidays I was playing with some newer gamers, some gamers who aren't very experienced, so we got out a few less complex, lighter games. Horrified, if people aren't familiar with it, is a cooperative game, so players are playing together, and there are a certain number of the famous universal monsters that they'll be trying to subdue and then kill over the course of the game. Now, depending on what monsters they bring out, there are kind of different ways to subdue each creature. So we played with people who have never played it before, who haven't really played that many board games. So we played with the 2 monsters that you're supposed to play with in a first play. And that included Dracula and the creature from the Black Lagoon. So when you're playing with Dracula, you need to go to the 4 different locations on the board where his coffins are, spend some tokens that are the matching color, and destroy those coffins. Once all 4 coffins are destroyed, you can just walk up to Dracula, use the tokens of the matching color to kill him, and he no longer has those coffins to kind of fly away and retreat to. For the creature from the Black Lagoon, you go to his lair, you spend tokens to constantly advance a boat through a pathway of X's of different colors, and then once you get to the end of that pathway with that boat, you can then go up to the creature from the Black Lagoon and kill him in a similar way. So every monster has a different set of pre-existing conditions that need to be fulfilled before they can be killed. Also in the game are the Invisible Man, Frankenstein, and the Bride of Frankenstein, who actually work together. So when you're playing with them, you'll play with both of them. And the way to, I guess, kill them or take them out of the game is pretty neat. You need to sort of reprogram their brains so that they're more open to love, and then you need to move them into the same space, and once they do, they'll sort of fall in love with each other, and then they're just out of the game. So I guess it's nice that you don't need to kill them, and you can, use a different kind of mechanic to remove them from the game. And I do like the variability for every monster. The other monsters in the game include the Wolfman, the Mummy, and I'm not sure if I already mentioned the Invisible Man, but the Invisible Man. Now this game is a very simple game to teach and to play. The only other thing that's really happening in this game is there are villagers that will occasionally come out when the monsters take their turn, and those villagers can be easily killed by monsters, so players want to keep the monsters away from the villagers and move the villagers to the locations where the villagers want to go. Once they do that, players will earn an additional perk card, and every perk card gives them a one-time ability. So the more they kind of deal with these villagers, the more these one-off special cards that they'll have to help them in moments when they need a boost for something. So I really like Horrified a lot. It's a really good game to play with really new gamers, maybe first-time gamers. It's also cooperative, so players aren't playing against each other. There's no conflict in that sense. It is a very kind of simple game. There's not a lot going on mechanically, so it does have the potential for an alpha gamer or sort of an armchair quarterback to come in and tell other people how to take their turns. So you just need to know that if you have someone like that in your game group, this is a game where that could potentially become a problem. For me, Horrified has, I think, replaced all of the Forbidden games. Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert, and I think the newest one is called Forbidden Sky. I haven't played that one. That one I think is a little bit more complex, and it has something to do with circuit systems, so you're actually kind of creating an electrical circuit when you play Forbidden Sky. So I actually haven't played that one. But as far as the first 2 Forbidden games go, I think I personally would always prefer to bring out Horrified. Now, it's not a super compelling game, but I do like the monsters, I do like the graphic design, I do like the ease of play. So for me, it's probably like in the 6 to low 7 rating, but it's a really good game that I would always bring out for newer gamers or gamers who just want a easy breezy cooperative game. The one thing I will say about player count, though, is that we played it with 5 players, and I think that may be too many players for Horrified. I've actually played it with 2 players, and I think also solo, kind of two-handing it myself, and I've done 3 monsters in a game, I think the toughest monsters in the game, fairly easily. But when you're playing with 5 players and you're going through that monster deck, so every time a player takes a turn, a monster is going to trigger and potentially attack. But that deck is the same number of cards whether you're playing with 2 players or 5 players. So if you have 5 players kind of all going around the board, doing different things, pursuing different agendas, they may not get as far as they would in a 2-player game where that focus could be a lot more specific. And so I think in a higher player count game, there's a tendency for kind of wasted cards, wasted resources, just things not being used to their maximum efficiency. And I will say that we lost the game pretty handily. We were playing with newer players, so the moves that they were taking was always not that efficient. But I think the bigger problem is just the way that you burn through cards so quickly in a 5-player game, when those turns aren't maybe as coordinated as they are in a lower player count game. So I probably would try to play this one with 2 to 4 players, stay away from 5. Probably 3 is a good sweet spot. But it is a very, very good light cooperative game, and probably my go-to for that complexity for a cooperative game. We also played Ticket to Ride, which is one of the lightest train games out there. It's a very intro-level game. I think I'd heard the kind of 4 cornerstone games of gaming being talked about at one point as Alhambra, Carcassonne, Ticket to Ride, and maybe 7 Wonders was the 4th game on that list. And I might also throw a few games in there like Dominion, which is kind of the big granddaddy of deck builders, and Splendor, which I think is, a great game, very kind of intro level. But those are a really good group of games to have, I think, on hand for newer gamers and intro level gamers. And I really like train games, so I was actually happy to play Ticket to Ride, even though my taste tends to veer more towards Railways of the World and Age of Steam, but I still enjoy train games. So we actually played this one at the higher player count again, which can get very tight with Ticket to Ride because you're still playing on the same map with the same number of routes. But instead of having, 2 or 3 players trying to find space on that map, you have 5 players. So it was a very tight game. And if you're not familiar with Ticket to Ride, on your turn you're doing one of 3 things. You are either drawing 2 cards, one at a time, that you will take into your hand, and you're collecting different sets of colored cards. Because when you want to build some tracks, you need to have that many colored cards in that stretch of track. You can also use wild cards. So you're either taking 2 cards, or you are building a track, in which case you're spending cards from your hand to lay out a track, or you say, hey, I need kind of more goals, more train routes, so you draw 3 train routes and then keep at least one of those 3. Now you don't want to have extra train routes, because at the end of the game, if you have unfulfilled train routes, you will lose points. So therein lies the gameplay crunch, I guess. Trying to determine how many more routes you think you'll be able to fulfill, and that's going to be limited by, the spaces on the board, the number of trains that you actually have that you can lay out on the board, and your ability to get the right colored cards that you need to build those tracks before someone else takes those spaces. It's a really, really good intro level game. It's very easy. It's very breezy. I think once you know the game, you're still making choices, but it doesn't feel very challenging to me. But I still like it. I still like the train aspect to it. And I think if you're playing with first-time gamers or kind of inexperienced gamers, it is a great game that introduces them to some of the mechanics of gaming and does it in a very approachable and visually appealing way. So we played that. I had a really good time with it. At some point, I think I might like to play some of the other Ticket to Ride maps, but I spend more of my train game playing with Railways and Age of Steam. There's just more decisions to be made and definitely more complexity and just a more compelling game. But I'll play Ticket to Ride, and I did, and I enjoyed it. I also had a first play of Tsukuyumi Full Moon Down. Now that is a game that I plan to do a first impressions video for, but I need to play it at least once more. This game existed once before in sort of a standee version, and I actually hear that the standee version is pretty good because the stats for the various units are on the bottom of the standees, and also when the standees are on the map, you can still see the tiles beneath. But Grey Fox Games decided to kind of upgrade Tsukuyumi Full Moon Down, and they did this huge miniature version. And the factions for Tsukuyumi Full Moon Down are crazy. Some of the craziest factions I've ever seen. So the theme here for this game is that the moon is now touching one of Earth's oceans, and it's affected, the gravitational pull of the Earth. There's been this sort of like post-apocalyptic event. I'm not really sure how any life would exist on the Earth if the moon was touching one of the oceans, but I think you need to suspend your disbelief a little bit. The factions that exist are very variable. So there is a Japanese faction that are cyber samurai, so they're samurai robots. There is a faction of dragons that you can play. That's one of the expansion factions. There's also an expansion faction of whales, so you could play whales in this game. There are some pandas, anthropomorphic pandas, so they're kind of human-seeming. In fact, one of them rides a Bengal tiger. There's a faction of robots, of mechs, that are the enemy of the dragons, so they're kind of dragon hunters, and there's only 5 units in that faction. Also with the dragons and the whales, there are only, I think, 5 to 10 units in those factions. But you've got other factions like the Dark Seed, which are these bugs, and that faction has at least 30 units to it, maybe even more. I played a faction called the Boar Lords, who are these kind of anthropomorphic boars, and it seemed like the way to play those successfully, which I did not do, is to just kind of focus on area control with them, and they're able to produce a lot more units fairly easily. There's a queen who can kind of pop out little tiny boarlings, and then you can evolve those into more powerful units. So essentially, Tsukuyumi Full Moon Down is a miniatures skirmish game, dudes on a map. And what makes it special is these very variable factions. I mean, the art for them and the design for the miniatures is insane and very, very cool. And the idea that you'd have all these like super strange groups struggling together, fighting for space is really, really cool. However, this Kickstarter was plagued with problems throughout production, and they ended up delivering this game almost 2 years late. And that was pre-pandemic. So it was actually supposed to be delivered in 2019, I think, or was it early 2020? But before the pandemic hit. And then, of course, there were production problems, and that didn't happen. And then as kind of it got more delayed, it ended up becoming a victim to the shipping crisis as well. And people who have been receiving this game all over the world for a while now, I think it fulfilled to Europe a while back first, maybe 6 months ago. But there's been a lot of reports of just problems, minis that have errors. And luckily I didn't have any of that. But when I got my copy, the base game box was completely crushed, really, like the lower part of the box. So once you take it off, the lid off, the whole thing kind of falls apart. Now, when you have a big box for a game like this with lots of miniatures in it, and this is a game that's going to play well at higher player counts, so you're probably not going to sit home and play this at 2 players, although it does have a 2-player variant. But this is a game that's going to shine at higher player counts. And the damage to the base game box, which was inside a larger shipping box that contained everything, all the other boxes were undamaged, which means that the damage didn't happen during shipping. It happened at the factory. It happened probably when they were loading the components into it, which means that somebody, whoever was loading it, knew that it was damaged. They probably damaged it. And rather than replacing it with a box that actually was structurally sound, they sent me this destroyed box. And I've talked to them about it. They said they can either give me a $10 credit or send me a replacement box, which is going to take at least another year. My feeling here is that if you're paying that much money, because this was not a cheap pledge, and it's a big kind of miniatures game, things need to come to you not broken. I mean, you're paying all this money to receive a new product, which should be in perfect, pristine working order. And there have been problems throughout this campaign. On top of that, I know friends who have had issues with some of Grey Fox's previous Kickstarters, including Reavers of Midgard. So unfortunately for me, and I know that they're about to launch a new Kickstarter for a game called Last Light that Roy Cannaday is designing, I'm not backing anything by them again. In fact, I'm probably not even buying any of their games. I just thought that this entire production was so mishandled. From producing the game to delivering the game, I don't really want to have anything to do with Grey Fox again. And I think their customer service and the way they've handled it has just been awful. So they're kind of off of my list of publishers that I'm going to consider buying games from, at least for a while, and I'm very unhappy with the way they handled this. I will say the game itself, though, I don't love it. I think the game itself has problems. The rule book is a mess. All the player cards are not very well designed. There is a lot of components on the table. There's just a lot of fiddliness. And if you're going to have that much stuff in a game, you need to have a system that deals with it well. And Tsukuyumi Full Moon Down does not. It is kind of a mess all over the place, from the rules to the components to everything. So I'm kind of sad. I'm bummed. I wanted this to be my big game, my big miniature skirmish game that would have these really cool factions, and I got the big playmat for it and everything. I'm really disappointed with the game. I plan on playing it another time or two and then doing a first impressions video, and if my feelings remain as they are now, I probably will try to sell this thing off. It's just, there's too much going on. It's going to be very hard to get it played. I can't really transport it anymore with the broken box, so it's going to be hard to take it to game meetups. Not that I'm actually doing those right now. I'm still kind of abiding by pandemic rules. But it's not a game that I'll probably play at home with 2 or 3 friends. It's a game that I think is going to shine when you're playing with a lot of people. But I have a broken box, and I don't really like the way it plays that well. It's super fiddly. It's a complicated teach. Not because the game itself is complicated, it's not, but there's just so many little kind of fiddly extra things going on. And then in terms of keeping the game, it just takes up a lot of space. There are a lot of boxes. I think there's 7 different boxes when you include like the box with the Kickstarter extras and things. So, I suppose on some level, every game is a gamble, and every process of playing a game is a learning experience. For me, this is one that's probably going to be left in the past after I sell the game and try to find a different game that will fulfill that goal in my collection. So just because of kind of all the extras, the fiddliness, all of that, I think at the end of the day, the score for this one, and I'm not sure yet, I'll play it a couple more times. I'll settle on a score. But for me, it's looking like it's probably going to come in the 5s or 6s. Right on that line of, I'll play it, I guess, if other people really want to play it. But I'm not going to suggest it. And it's not a game that I feel I need to keep in my collection long term. Or a game that I really want to spend time teaching to people who I think will have mixed reactions to it and mixed experiences with it. And it's just, there's too much game for a game that is so often unsuccessful at what it's trying to do. The last game that I played this period is called Unsettled, and that is the latest Kickstarter from Orange Nebula, the publisher who made Vindication, and it is pretty cool. Right now, Unsettled is sitting at around number 3 on my top games of 2021. I still have a lot more games to play. I'm not sure where it's going to land when I finally complete that list, but I think it's unlikely that it would, drop off the top 10. So I think it's going to be in the top 10 at least. It is a very well-produced game. It is gorgeous. The components and the whole design with the game trays and the boxes and the storage system, everything's great. I would really expect nothing less from Orange Nebula at this point. They are, in my mind, emulating other publishers like Mind Clash or Chip Theory Games, and there's just a lot of care and attention to detail in everything that they do. Now, Unsettled is a cooperative game. It is complex. It is also very difficult. There is exploration in Unsettled, but it is really more of a survival game, and it is tough. It is the kind of game that you are going to lose quite a bit at. It is not, however, a scripted game. So it's not a game like The Seventh Continent or Time Stories where you're going to keep going through it over and over with the knowledge of what you did last and trying to kind of perfect your puzzle solving abilities and win. I mean, you are going to try to win Unsettled, but it's not scripted. So things will be different every time you play it. And theoretically, you could play, one variant of the game and just play it over and over, and it would be different every time in a lot of the smaller things. Now, there are 6 different planets in the game. This is kind of a space survival game. And so thematically, at the beginning of any game, your team of astronauts has crash landed on a planet. So if you back the Kickstarter like I did, you have 6 different planets. If you get it at retail, I think it comes with 2. Each planet has 3 different tasks. So when you play a game, you're going to select a task, and that task has a series of objectives. If you complete all of the objectives, you win the game. So when we play the first planet called Winora, we played the first task, but there are 2 other tasks. So theoretically in the future, we will beat the first task. I haven't done it yet. I've played it twice. I haven't done it yet. Gotten close both times, but haven't done it. But when we do beat that, I can then go and play the next task, or task C. I can play any task whenever I want, but there are 3 different tasks for each planet box. And each task with its series of objectives is going to play very differently. It's basically a whole different game. It's just that each of those 3 tasks will share a world and certain mechanics. So you have 3 different variants for each planet box. You have, if you backed everything, 6 different boxes, and every different planet is very different. So the first planet is a spore world, and players are sort of encouraged to become a fungal host. And once they do that, they're going to be hallucinating, and they will gain access to other abilities that can help them on the surface of this crazy, crazy planet. I know there's a desert planet. I think there's a frozen planet. So all of those other planets are going to have mechanics that are very specific to them. At the end of the day, Unsettled kind of feels like Pandemic, something like that, where it's a cooperative game that's kind of difficult to succeed at and kind of punishing. But the difference here is that you're kind of getting 6 games in one, and each of those 6 games has 3 different variants. So you really have 18 different versions of the game, and the way it's designed, there's no reason that they can't come out with more planet boxes in the future. And knowing Orange Nebula, I think that's something that they probably will do. They seem to like to add on to things and produce more content. Vindication has had 3 different Kickstarters as they've slowly rolled out different kinds of content, ways to play the game, expansions, modules, things like that. So I think there's probably more in the future for Unsettled. I will say, though, that the base game is gorgeous to look at, and it's a lot of fun to play. It is hard. You're going to lose a lot. But I think right now, at this point in time, if you're looking for a game with a higher level of complexity that is hard, but has a great sense of humor and great art and great components, really kind of top-notch, this is probably the game to beat right now. My final thing I will say about it, though, is there is another cooperative game out there that I played this year that was another Kickstarter that delivered, and that is called Sleeping Gods, and that game is actually number 1 right now on my top games of 2021. So that is another cooperative game. It is another exploration and survival game, but that one kind of plays like a campaign, and not only one campaign but multiple campaigns. So as you play multiple campaigns in Sleeping Gods, you will be able to kind of fulfill different achievements, almost like a video game where you kind of need to play the story through a few times to be able to do everything. But Sleeping Gods is very much more designed as a campaign game and a multiple campaign game, whereas Unsettled is designed as a series of one-off adventures. But it's really good. I would rate Unsettled probably around a 9.0, and as I said already, it is right now sitting at number 3 on my top games of 2021. So that wraps the games that I've played this period, and now I'm going to talk to you about the 8 currently running Kickstarters that are going to be funding this week. start, let me just say that, as I mentioned at the top of the video, if anything is of specific interest to you, you can go down into the description. There's a link. It will take you over to the campaign. You can take a closer look at it over there and decide if it's something that you want to pledge. Also, I talk about prices in this section. Everything is in terms of US dollars, and I do not talk about shipping. So if you are somewhere else in the world, you just need to make that translation for the currency, and you also need to see what the shipping price is for your country or your state or your province or wherever you are. And then finally, I do not cover the pledge levels to get into a pledge manager. Usually it's like $1 or $5. I don't cover print and play pledge levels. And then on the other side, I don't cover group pledges or retailer pledges or pledges where they only have 1 or 2 of these and it's for something like really expensive, a vanity item, maybe something, piece of artwork that's been signed or a special statue. So I only cover the pledge levels that are something that a consumer would be looking at when they're deciding which level to buy, which version of the game they think is going to have the right experience for them. So the first game for today is called Hanamikoji Geisha's Road. It's going to complete funding on Tuesday, November the 30th. They had a minimum required funding goal for this one of $10,000, and they're currently sitting at $135,000, which means they're at about 13.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, this is a game for 2 players. It's exclusively a 2-player game. It's going to play in about 20 to 30 minutes. Complexity appears to be about medium light, and we're going to set the risk on this campaign at medium high. Now, what this game is a 2-player card game, and it's about players sponsoring and supporting geishas and helping them rise in their career and succeed at being geishas. The designers here are Jerry Chang, appears to be Jerry's first published game, and Eros Lin. And Eros Lin has previously designed Burano, Herbalism, and Roundhouse. The artist is Maisher Lee. Maisher Lee has previously worked on the original Hanamikoji, Shadows in Kyoto, and Walking in Burano. The publisher is Emperor S4, and just as with the artist, they have previously published the original Hanamikoji, Herbalism, and Walking in Burano. So Maisher Lee seems to be their go-to artist. Now, for the average backer, we have 5 different pledge levels to look at for this campaign. The first is for $19. It's called Hanamikoji, and that pledge level will actually get you the original Hanamikoji game. So not Geisha Road, just the original Hanamikoji game. If you want the new version, you want to pledge at the $22 pledge level. It's called Hanamikoji Geisha Road. That will get you the new game. For $39, you can pledge for the collector's bundle, and that is going to give you both games in a kind of book-like slipcase that will hold them together. For $59, you can pledge everything Hanamikoji. That will get you the collector's bundle, the bookcase, as well as the Hanamikoji Action Tiles expansion. And then for $89, you can get everything Emperor S4. That's going to include all of the Hanamikoji stuff that I've talked about so far, and then 2 more games that Emperor S4 publishes, Herbalism, Shadows in Kyoto, and then a 12 metal pawn set for Shadows in Kyoto. And Emperor S4 is aiming to deliver Hanamikoji Geisha Road in May of 2022. Next up, we have the first of 3 games that will be completing their funding on Wednesday, December 1st. This one is Resurgence. It had a minimum required funding goal of $42,000. It's currently sitting at $68,000, so it's funded, but it hasn't funded as much as some of these other games that we've talked about. It's only at 1.6 times that minimum required funding goal. And I think the reason for that is while it features a game that is sort of being heralded as the designer's greatest game, and that is coming after a series of games that have been kind of each heralded as the designer's greatest game. So he is making a lot of great games and improving with every one. And yeah, but this is his publishing company, and it's kind of newly formed. It's the first game that they're producing. It's the first Kickstarter that they're doing. And I think maybe they just didn't have as much marketing. So it looks like a great game, but it's kind of flying under the radar. And considering the other games that he's made lately, it's a little disappointing that there hasn't been more interest here. They seem to still be going ahead with it though, and I think they're fine with what they have. And I think they just want to get a successful Kickstarter done out of the gate. We may see them come back to this later and do, who knows, an expansion Kickstarter, and then try to trade in on the good reputation that the game creates, because I have a feeling that this game is going to do very well once it delivers. So Resurgence plays 1 to 4 players. Games are going to run about an hour to an hour and a half. Gameplay looks to be in the medium-heavy range, and because it is a first-time publishing entity doing a first-time Kickstarter, we're going to set the risk with this campaign at high, even though I personally have a lot of great faith in the designer, and I'm not really worried about problems with the game. But I think whenever it's a first-time publisher, or they're doing a first-time Kickstarter, or both of those things combined, these are kind of new responsibilities for people who haven't necessarily done it before. So there's a little more risk involved. Now, what is it? Well, it is a post-apocalyptic themed bag builder and hidden worker placement game. So that is a very unique combination of mechanics. I don't know how often we've seen a hidden worker placement game to begin with. I think players are taking kind of worker placement spaces on a player board that's behind a player screen. So other players don't necessarily know what they're doing until it's revealed as the actions are kind of shown later in a round. But it's going to combine that with bag building and create a very unique, hopefully very compelling gameplay experience. Now, this game is designed by Stan Kordonsky. He has another game about to deliver. It's called Endless Winter Paleo-Americans. That game looks amazing. I'm really excited for it, and I think you're going to see that game on a lot of, top games of 2022 next year at this time. Now, apart from that, Stan has also designed Dice Hospital, Lock Up a Role Player Tale, and Rurik Dawn of Kiev. And Rurik just had their expansion Kickstarter called Stone and Blade before Paleo-Americans, and that game has also been getting a lot of hype, both before and after the expansion came out. So Stan Kordonsky is just very much on a run, and he seems to be improving with every game, and he's already designing at such a high level that I think the expectations for those in the know on Resurgence are very high. The artist on Resurgence is named Oleg Volodin. It appears to be Oleg's first published game. And as we mentioned before, the publishing entity is called Half a Kingdom Games. This is the first game that they're publishing, and it is Stan Kordonsky's company. Now, there's only one pledge level here. So if you're curious and you think you might want to back this one, it's very easy. It's not that expensive, and there don't seem to be any add-ons either. So you're getting everything in one pledge level, all inclusive, and it's very affordable. It is a $55 pledge level. It is called Hero Pledge. So if you're wanting to back Resurgence, that's your pledge level. Finally, Half a Kingdom Games is aiming to deliver Resurgence in August of 2022. Our second game funding on Wednesday, December 1st is called Starfighters Rapid Fire. Now, they had a minimum required funding goal for this one of $13,000. They're currently sitting at $28,000, which again, like Resurgence, isn't a huge amount, but it is certainly funded, and they're about 2 times that minimum required funding goal. So this is a game for 1 to 4 players. It's going to play in about 20 to 40 minutes. The complexity of the game appears to be light, and we're going to set the risk on this one at medium-low. Again, because of the publisher. This publisher has produced a lot of successful Kickstarters. Now, this is essentially a starship combat game that's going to use dice rolling, player elimination, and real time. And the various permutations of the game for the player counts include a solo player variant, a 1v1, a 2v2 team mode, and then a 3-player free-for-all. So depending on how many players you're playing with, it's going to determine the mode. It's designed by Michael Dunsmore and Jordan Nichols, who have both previously worked on a game called We Need to Talk. And the art here is by Javier Gonzalez Cava, who previously did art on Caverna the Cave Farmers. Cooper Island, and Watson and Holmes. And Starfighter's Rapid Fire is being published by Alley Cat Games, and you may know them from some of their previous games, including Chocolate Factory, Dice Hospital, and Welcome to Dino World. So they seem to be focusing more on lighter games that are friendly for families and newer gamers. So there are 3 different pledge levels here for Starfighters. The first is for $39. That is the retail edition, and that will get you the bare bones version of the game, the same version that will eventually go to retail. For $47, you can back the limited Kickstarter edition. That's going to include things like the Cosmic Hazard mini expansion, a numbered box, a Starship miniature, the solo mode. So keep in mind, that means the solo mode is not included in the retail edition. And deluxeified components, which in this case seem to just be 8 wooden torpedo markers with some silkscreen printing on them. And then finally, remember this is a dice rolling game, so there's going to be a lot of dice rolling in this game. So the final pledge level is $61. It's called the Limited Edition Bundle, and that is going to be the Kickstarter edition, plus they're going to throw in 4 dice trays. Now you can also buy those 4 dice trays, that bundle, as an add-on for $20. So if you're doing it through this pledge level, you're essentially getting that bundle for $16 or a $4 discount. But if for some reason, I don't know, you wanted the retail version of the game with the dice trays, you could just add the dice trays on as an add-on. And Alley Cat Games is aiming to deliver Starfighters Rapid Fire in September of 2022. The final game completing its funding on Wednesday, December 1st is actually on Gamefound. So if you want to back this one, you need to go to Gamefound and not Kickstarter. If you go down into the link in the description section, it will send you to the correct place. Now, this is the Twisted Fables Epic Collection, and they had a minimum required funding goal for this one of $10,000. They're currently sitting at $68,000, which is, 6.8, so almost 7 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, this is a game for 2 to 4 players. It's going to play in about 30 to 60 minutes. Complexity on this seems to be medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk on this one at medium low. Now, that's even a less risk than I think I would normally assign to this publisher, Dimension Games. And the reason for that is this game has already been produced. So this is not a Kickstarter where they are looking to make the game. This is a Kickstarter that has already delivered in the past, and they have extra stock right now. So they're doing this crowdfunding campaign just to sell off that extra stock, which means that the game's already produced, it's already done, it's already completed, it's already just sitting there waiting to be delivered, which means when we get to the end of this entry, the delivery time for the game is very soon. So it's not going to take a lot of time. It's already basically just waiting to go into a truck and be shipped to you. Now, what is this game? Well, it is fairy tale themed, but kind of dark, a darker take on fairy tale themes, and it is a deck building fighter. Now, there are a couple designers on here, there are a bunch of artists, but for all of them, this appears to be a first published game, so there aren't a lot of credits to spend time with for this one. So the 2 designers are Gang Wang and Xiang Gao. The artists are Qiaoyang Yom, Fajareka Satyawan, Gerald Singh, Ibrahim Swade, and Dennis Tsai Perko. The game is being published by Dimension Games, who have previously published Dawn of Madness and Deep Madness, which are 2 games that are kind of thematically connected. They're these games with this theme of kind of underwater zombies and adventure. So the game that was made first of those 2, Deep Madness, is sort of a dungeon crawler in this underwater, monstery zombie world. And then Dawn of Madness, which came later, it still has yet to deliver. That's more of a kind of storyline exploration game in that universe, kind of like an Etherfields or a Tainted Grail. Now, because this game has already been produced, there's really one pledge level. There are several different versions of that pledge level, but those are for different countries, different areas of the world. So you need to make sure that you are pledging the right area for where you live. But they will all be $69. It's called the Twisted Fables Epic Collection, and that's going to include the core box of the game, the Flood and Flame expansion, the Dark Machinations expansion, the Fable Miniatures, boxes 1 and 2, and a 2v2 upgrade pack. So if you were buying this, like let's say at retail or something, if it wasn't the Epic Collection, you're not going to have any miniatures for it, and you will also have only a 2-player game. But if you're backing this Epic version, you're going to have the ability to do 2-on-2 and bring the player count up to 4. There are also some add-ons. For $15, you can add on the Card Sleevers bundle, which will be all the cards that you need for the game. And then there are a bunch of playmats. Now, most of the playmats are $15. There's a whole selection to choose from. A couple of them are $18 because they have a stage card included. And then Dimension Games, as I mentioned earlier at the start of this entry, they are going to be delivering this Epic Collection for Twisted Fables in December of 2021, which means this coming month, the month that we are about to go into. So the game's already done, it's already completed, it's just waiting to be shipped out. From there, we move to the first of 2 games that will be completing its funding on Thursday, December 2nd. And first up is Call to Adventure Epic Origins. Now, this game had a minimum required funding of $50,000. They're currently sitting at about $409,000, which is a little bit over 8 times that minimum required funding goal. This is a game for 1 to 4 players. It plays in about 30 to 60 minutes. The complexity looks to be medium light, but it's just barely over light. It's just barely into that medium light range. So it's almost light. This is a very, very light game. And we're going to set the complexity for this campaign at medium low. Again, it's a publisher who's done a lot of stuff. Now, Call to Adventure is a card game. It is a hero crafting cooperative game, and it heavily features storytelling. So you are kind of playing together. You do have things you're trying to do in the game, but it's not so much about trying to win, although you can win. It's really more about the storyline of creating your character. I suppose in some ways, like let's say role player or something like that, but even pared back in terms of the gameplay. So really much of this is just about the sort of joy of how you create your character and the story that you tell as you do that, and then kind of how you work together in a cooperative game to tell a little bit of a larger story, everyone working together. There are 2 designers on this one, Johnny O'Neill and Chris O'Neill. Johnny O'Neill has previously worked on Boss Monster, the original Call to Adventure, and Call to Adventure The Stormlight Archive. And Chris O'Neill has worked on Boss Monster, Rise of the Mini-Bosses, and Call to Adventure The Stormlight Archive. Now, there are a group of 5 artists on this game, but only one of them has previous credits. So Darren Calvert has previously worked on All Hands on Deck, Frank and Die, and Overboss, A Boss Monster Adventure. The other 4 artists are Anidi Hakosari, Ari Abara, Kevin O'Neill, and Gal Orr. And the game is being published by Brotherwise Games. It's really Johnny and Chris O'Neill's company, so kind of they produce everything that those 2 guys design. And their previous games include Boss Monster, Call to Adventure, and Unearth. Now, there are 4 different pledge levels for this one. The first one is for $40. It's called The Adventurer, and that's just going to get you the base game here. The Call to Adventure Epic Origins base game. If you pledge at the $60 level, which is called the Hero, you're going to get the deluxe version of the game, which includes a box that has sort of like a magnetic clasp on it, where you can kind of store everything, as well as a full set of custom sleeves. Now, for $95, you can pledge at a level called the Epic Hero, and that will add to the previous level a luxury playmat and a folded space insert that is designed for this special magnetic clasp box. It's even colored, I think, to make it look more book-like. And I've seen the pictures of it on the page. It looks really, really good. I think if I was pledging this one, I probably would get that insert. It's just going to make everything easy, and it's very attractive physically. There is, however, one final pledge level that is for $200. It is called The Chosen One, and that's going to include the original Call to Adventure game, an expansion that was put out for it called The Name of the Wind, which is a 75 card expansion, and then Call to Adventure The Stormlight Archive, that is a 125 card version of the game. It stands alone, so you can play it by itself. And the reason that it's kind of its own thing and it stands alone is that that game specifically is themed around Brandon Sanderson's books. So it's its own experience, but if you really like Call to Adventure and you kind of want to get everything, you can do that in this pledge level. Also included are 2 more full set of sleeves. So essentially that will bring the total to 3 full sets of sleeves, and that will be enough for the new game, the original Call to Adventure, the Name of the Wind expansion, and the Stormlight Archives standalone game. And then Brotherwise is aiming to deliver Call to Adventure Epic Origins in June of 2022. Also completing funding on Thursday, December 2nd, is a game called Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. Now, this game had a minimum required funding goal of $17,000. However, this campaign has kind of exploded, and they're currently sitting at $597,000, which is 35 times that minimum required funding goal. That is a large multiplier, larger than you usually find. So this campaign has done very, very well. Hegemony is a game for 1 to 4 players. It's going to play in about 1.5 to 3 hours. It is a game that looks to be of heavy complexity, and we're going to set the risk here on this campaign at high, again, because it has newer publishing entities behind it that haven't really done much before, even though the designer here is a fairly well-known designer. We'll talk about him in a second. But essentially what this game is a game where you are doing a simulation of a country, and that will include its economic systems and political systems. It is a competitive game, so you're going to be playing against each other, but you're doing that within the structure of a country's, kind of government and different systems. And it is very asymmetric and card-driven. It's designed by Vangelis Bagiartakis, who has previously designed such games as Among the Stars, Fields of Green, which is sort of a retheming of Among the Stars to a more pastoral theme. It's kind of more farmlands and things like that versus Among the Stars, where it takes place in outer space. But those 2 games are very similar. And then Kitchen Rush. The other designer, who does not have credits, so this appears to be his first published game, is named Varnavis Timotheu. And the art on this game is by Jacob Skop, who previously worked on Nanti Narking and Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire. Finally, the publisher here is Hegemonic Product Games, which seems like it was a publishing entity that was created to publish this game. Not sure if they'll produce more games in the future. Oftentimes a publisher, uses a game, their first game, as their name, like they did with Stronghold Games. So they certainly could produce more games in the future, but it feels like that name was chosen because of this game, since it shares the same hegemonic name. Now, kind of like Resurgence, there's only 1 pledge level for this game. So the fact that it's made so much money, $600,000 almost so far, when there's only 1 pledge level, there's not a lot of add-ons, and it's not that expensive a game, is even more impressive. That pledge level is $67. It's called the Hegemony Game, and it will get you the game. And that is it. There's really nothing else going on. There's no more pledge levels. There's not a lot of extra add-ons. However, if you did not pledge the game within the first 72 hours, people who did that got an add-on for free. So I like it when campaigns do this. They kind of give people an incentive to back early, but they still make that freebie available to backers who weren't in early. So if you missed backing early, you don't necessarily miss that extra. You just have to pay for it. So there's 1 add-on. It is the add-on that went free to backers who backed in the first 72 hours. If you would like to get it as well, and you're just backing now, you'll need to add it on. It's called the Historical Events Mini Expansion, and that's $8. So 67 plus 8, that'll bring your total to 75, and then shipping for wherever you live. And Hegemonic Product Games is looking to deliver Hegemony, lead your class to victory in November of 2022. So we're down to our final 2 games here. The first one is going to complete its funding on Friday, December the 3rd. It's called The Realm of Shadows, a trio of solo games. Now, they had a minimum required funding goal of $12,000. They're currently sitting around $47,000, so just under 4 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, there are 3 games that make up this package. The Hand of Destiny, The Forgotten Road, and The Last Stronghold. Those first 2 games have a 1-player count, so they are exclusively solo games. The last one, The Last Stronghold, can be played at 1-player or 2-player. So you can play it cooperatively with somebody else. Games play, depending on the game, between 10 and 25 minutes. I think some of the games have 10 to 20 minutes listed as their game time, and some of them have 15 to 25. I'm just going to call it 10 to 25 for the whole thing. The complexity on these games is light, and we're going to set the risk for this campaign at medium-high. So you're going to be dealing with things like hand management and just trying to solve a gameplay puzzle of efficiency. The third game, The Last Stronghold, is more of a dice-driven siege game. So you'll be using dice and you're trying to, keep the enemies at bay. And you're either doing that solo or 2 players working together. So I believe the first of these 3 games that was designed was The Hand of Destiny. And it was designed by Joe Klipfel. He only has 1 designing credit to his name right now. It's for a game called Gloomholden. And it was kind of a self-produced game that took Gloomhaven and made it into a very pared back, simplified card game that you could play by yourself and just do it with only the cards in your hand. So it's almost like a pocket or travel version of Gloomhaven, and it was essentially, I think, kind of a print and play originally. So I believe he designed the first game in this series called The Hand of Destiny. And then Gabe Barrett, who designed the other 2 games in this series and is also the person that runs the publishing company, because the publishing company putting this out is Gabe Barrett's company. Gabe took that original design, I believe, and then just spawned 2 more games off of it. So Gabe is the designer here on The Forgotten Road and The Last Stronghold, and other games that Gabe has designed previously include The Final Flicktier, Hunted Kobayashi Tower, and Hunted Mining Colony 415. Now, there are 2 different artists for this group of 3 games, but I believe that both artists worked on all 3 games. The first is George M. Velez, and he has previously worked on both of those Hunted games, Hunted Kobayashi Tower and Hunted Mining Colony 415, so he has a previous relationship with Gabe Barrett and Barrett Publishing. The other artist is named John Merchant, and he self-published a couple of games called Squire for Hire and Squire for Hire Mystic Runes, and that's what I think he really kind of cut his teeth on, and now he's doing some additional work as just an artist for hire. Those 2 Squire for Hire games, I believe he designed those as well as did the art for them. Finally, this trio of solo games is being published by Barrett Publishing, and it is Gabe Barrett's company, so they have published his games, which include The Final Flicktier, Hunted Kobayashi Tower, and Hunted Mining Colony 415. Now, there are 4 different pledge levels on this, but they're all very specific and spare. There's not a lot of extras, there are not a lot of add-ons. There's just 4 pledge levels that kind of divide up how you may want to order these 3 games. So for $12, you can pledge for The Hand of Destiny. For $24, you can pledge for The Forgotten Road. Also for $24, separately, you can pledge for The Last Stronghold. And then finally, for $50, you can pledge an all-in, and that will include all 3 games. So if you were to pledge them all separately, it's about $60 for those 3 games. So the $50 bundle gives you a $10 discount. And Barrett Publishing is anticipating delivering this trio of solo games, A Realm of Shadows, in June of 2022. That brings us to our final game that is a currently running Kickstarter. It is going to complete its funding on Sunday, December 5th, and that game is the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim Adventure board game. This is also the game of all of the games I'm talking about today that is currently funding for the most amount of money. They had a minimum required funding goal of $133,000, so it was very high, but they are currently sitting at $1.2 million, which is about 9.3 times that minimum required funding goal. Also, the Elder Scrolls Skyrim is on Gamefound. So just as with Twisted Fables, if this is something that you are interested in, you need to go look for it on Gamefound, not on Kickstarter. But if you go down to the description section below and click on the link, it will take you over to that campaign on Gamefound. Now, this is a game for 1 to 4 players. Sessions are going to play in about 1 to 2 hours. The complexity here looks to be medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk at this campaign on medium high. And the reason for that is the publisher hasn't really done that many games before, and this is a big game. There's a lot of miniatures, there's a lot of stuff involved in this game. So it's an expensive campaign to produce, and it's a publisher that hasn't done that many games before. If you are familiar with the Elder Scrolls video games, then you already know that this is a video game adaptation. It is also a cooperative campaign game. Now, there are 3 designers on this one. None of them have any published games, although I think they've all worked on a game that's going to be publishing soon this year, early next year, anytime. But as of right now, they do not have any published games. It's another reason that the risk is a little higher than normal, medium high, because newer designers. The first designer is Javier Angeres Cabarrasi. The second designer is Juan Echenique. And the third designer is named Stefano Guerriero. There are 2 artists credited on the Elder Scrolls Skyrim. The first artist is Chris Aubin, who's previously worked on Monster Apocalypse, Super Dungeon Explorer Forgotten King, and War Machine Prime MK2. The other artist is Katya Thomas, and this appears to be her first published game. Modiphius Entertainment is the publisher on this one. They've previously worked on Fallout, Wasteland Warfare, Siege of the Citadel, and Thunderbirds. Now, there are really 3 pledge levels for this one, but there's a bunch of extras, so I will go over those after I talk about the different pledge levels. The first pledge level is for $91. It's called Base Game. It's just going to get you the base game. For $187, you can pledge at the Gameplay pledge level, and that's going to add in 2 expansions, the Dawnguard expansion and the From the Ashes expansion. You can also pledge at the Deluxe pledge level for $294. That's going to include the base game, both of those expansions, as well as a miniature upgrade set. So you won't be getting a lot of miniatures in previous pledge levels. Some of the expansions come with some miniatures, but if you want all of the expansions, you need to pledge at this higher pledge level. So you'll get that miniatures upgrade set, you'll get a neoprene playmat, and you'll get basically metal coins. They're calling them metal gold septums. Now, if you wanted to pledge them separately for some reason, like if you were just getting the base game but you wanted the coins, you can, for $20, add on the metal gold septums. For $27, you can add on a 5 to 8 player expansion. So this game could potentially play up to 8 players. Also take note that that 5 to 8 player expansion is not included in any of the pledge levels. So if it's something that you want, you need to add that on. You can also get the From the Ashes expansion as an add-on for $45, or for $53, you can add on the Dawnguard expansion. So they're definitely going to be more expensive than if you were to get them in a bundle, but if for some reason you just wanted maybe one of them along with the base game, you could add them on. The miniatures upgrade set is also available separately as an add-on for $73, and for $80, you can add on something called the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms Starter Bundle, and that is a different game. It is not a game that has anything to do with the rest of this. It is a game that was previously published in 2019. It's a 1 to 2 player game, sort of a tactical war game, a standalone game. It's got a heavy complexity on Board Game Geek, and I believe the rating over there right now is a 7.2. So there's no reason to get that if you want, everything else that's coming in this campaign. And if you only care about the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim adventure board game, you don't need to add that on. It's just kind of an extra thing. It's its own thing. But if you want it, it is available as an add-on for $80. And then finally, Modiphius Entertainment is aiming to deliver the Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim adventure board game in August of 2022. So that concludes the currently running Kickstarters for this period. I would like to quickly mention the games that I acquired this period. I did not pledge any games from last period. I haven't for the last couple weeks, so there's not going to be a pledge section in this video. However, I am pledging 2 of the games in this video. And if you want to try to figure out what that is, you could, maybe leave a comment in the comments section, but I will reveal next week in next week's Kickstarter Weekly the 2 games that I pledged during this period. As for what I acquired, there was really only one thing that came in this week, and that was a bundle of map packs for a game called Wildlands, which is a very light skirmish miniatures game designed by Martin Wallace. I still haven't gotten it to the table, but Martin Wallace is one of my favorite designers, and I'm really intrigued by his doing this lighter miniature skirmish game. So there are 2 additional map packs. They just kind of had extra boards to bring more variability to the game. They're kind of hard to find. A lot of the online retailers don't have them in stock, but I was able to get them through Amazon. I rarely use Amazon these days, but I wanted to kind of complete my Wildlands collection and get everything Wildlands, and I just didn't see another way to do it, or to do it easily. So I got Map Pack 1 and Map Pack 2. Map Pack 1 features boards for the Warlock's Tower and the Crystal Caverns. And Map Pack 2 features, I think, 2 different boards for something called the Fall of the Dark House. I'm really looking forward to getting into Wildlands and playing with the different factions. I also do have both expansion factions. One is here right now, one is on its way. So I'm looking forward to playing around with those and to experimenting with all the different maps. I think for me, Wildlands is going to be a game that kind of sits next to Unmatched. They're both kind of skirmishy games that you can play with a couple players, easy, light. They both have deck building mechanics, and they just seem like a lot of fun and very quick to get to the table, and also easy to teach people, even non-gamer. So I may eventually pick one of those systems over the other, either Wildlands or Unmatched. I also do have Dice Throne. That's a little bit different because you're rolling dice, but I think all 3 of those games are combat-y, 1v1 games that still have fun, interesting choices to make, and are games that, as someone who gravitates more towards heavier games, are still welcome in my collection, are games I really, really want to play and kind of have when I'm looking for something shorter, quicker, easier to teach, and lighter. Lastly, let's talk briefly about what's coming for the channel. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because in the past I think I've talked about what's coming, and then I haven't always been able to produce all of that content, and I don't want to be disappointing anyone. So for now, I'm just going to kind of quickly talk about what's coming without going too far into the future. So this is the first thing, obviously, you're going to see this week. I'm shooting it on Sunday afternoon. I have a friend who's in town from Atlanta this week, and I believe he'll be coming over on Monday. I'm actually going to be playing some games with him, which leaves me Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week. So I will be producing another Kickstarter Weekly at the end of the week. It will be a very short video. The next 2 weeks, probably even 3 and 4, will be very short videos. And I know that because I already know what games I'm going to be profiling, and there just aren't a lot of Kickstarters out right now. It's the holidays. I think big publishers just aren't running as many campaigns right now. It's a lot to do on top of the holiday season, right? So I know from next week's video, I am only going to be talking about, at most, 2 games that are currently running, and the following week looks the same. I don't really know the weeks after that, but I'm kind of anticipating that until we get into mid-January, that will continue. So those videos will be shorter, they'll be quicker to produce, which will give me more time this week after I finish editing this video to get other stuff out. So the other things that I think you'll be seeing this week are my first impressions video for Dinosaur World, my October Game of the Month video, which will probably be followed next week by my November Game of the Month video, and then I'll be caught up with that series. And you probably will get one more video from me this week. It will probably either be a brew first impressions video or an unsettled first impressions video. And if I don't get out one of those, like whichever one I don't get out this week will come out next week. But as far as the other videos coming out next week, I will be talking more about those in the Kickstarter Weekly that will premiere later this week, the shorter video that will land at the end of this week. So thank you very much for spending some time with me over this holiday season and watching this video. I hope there was some good, helpful content in that list of Kickstarters that I talked about. If you haven't done it yet, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, which you can do down below. Have a great holiday season, play lots of games, and I will see you very soon in my next slate of videos. Take care. Have an awesome week.